When the ambulance doors closed and the stretcher rolled away, my son looked at me like I was already invisible. I heard my daughter-in-law whisper into the paramedic's ear, "Give him a good bath and bury him. We have to leave for our summer trip to Tuscany." Those words landed in my chest like cold stones. For a moment the street was full of normal sounds. Tires on wet pavement, distant voices, the low hum of the city. And yet around me, everything felt hollow and wrong. I smiled because I did not want to make a scene, and because a small part of me hoped I had somehow misunderstood what I had heard. I still remember the way his hand felt in mine that morning. He was light, lighter than the man who had held grocery bags and fixed leaky faucets and taught our son how to ride a bicycle. His breath had been slow and shallow, his skin cool like autumn air. I kept telling myself to speak softly, to let him go in peace. But the world outside the hospital window kept moving, as if nothing new had happened. My son and his wife spoke in quick, bright sentences about plans and bookings, like they were arranging a picnic rather than burying someone's father. I am an ordinary woman who loved an ordinary life. Our house in Evanston was the kind where neighbors waved over the fence and where cups of tea sat cooling on saucers. My husband, Michael, cooked simple meals with a patience I admired. In the evenings, we would sit on the couch, his arm around my shoulders, watching old movies with the sound turned low. We raised our son with the same care we used to patch a torn sleeve or teach him how to read a map. I thought those small acts were the stitches that held everything together. People say grief is loud. For me, it began as a quiet thing that grew. The first week after he left, my house felt too full of nothing. His chair by the window was empty, his jacket still hanging in the hall. My son was polite. He called and asked if I needed anything, then texted short messages with quick emojis. My daughter-in-law called twice, both times saying she would be over later, and then never came. I kept thinking maybe they were in shock. Maybe the world had not yet sunk in for them. But the way they talked about the funeral, the way they put a calendar on the fridge and circled dates for a holiday abroad, it felt like they had already moved on. There were moments that cut deeper than others. At the funeral home, while the staff prepared the things that make a goodbye look proper, my son asked about travel insurance. He asked about passport renewals. I could see his lips move, and the words were strange in that setting. My daughter-in-law laughed at a small joke someone made, then checked her phone. At that moment, standing beside the polished wood and the faded photograph of my husband, I felt as if I were the only person there who had been surprised by the loss. The room smelled of flowers and polite restraint. I do not want to make my son into a villain. He is my boy, and I remember him as a small child who once pressed his face against my knee and asked if I would always be there. But people change. Grief reveals things that were always there, or perhaps it makes us notice them for the first time. I had always thought loyalty was simple. You are there when someone needs you. That day I learned that loyalty can be a quiet, rare thing, and sometimes it can be traded for comfort. When my daughter-in-law told the paramedic about Tuscany, her voice was bright and calm. I remember thinking how strange it was that the sound felt pleasant in her mouth, like a promise of a holiday rather than the end of a life. Walking back to my small house that evening, the sky opened and rain washed the world clean. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the photograph of Michael on the mantel. The photograph smiled back, full of small, ordinary joy. I thought of all the mornings we had shared, the way he whistled while making coffee, the way he never left the back door unlocked. A neighbor knocked and left a pie on the step. She did not ask anything. Her kindness felt like a lantern in a dark room. And yet the ache of being set aside, to have one's grief reduced to a scheduling problem, spread through me like fog. That night I dreamed a small thing. I stood at the shore, and the ocean carried away a smooth stone. I watched it sink, and as it sank, ripples moved outward and outward until the whole surface was different. In the dream, a voice asked me if I wanted the stone back. I woke with tears in my eyes, and I understood that some losses are not meant to be returned. I also felt a quiet, rising thought. A small ember that was not anger, not yet, but an expectation that the world keeps its own balance. People would make choices. The world often answers in ways we do not expect. I do not pray for people to suffer. I have never been that kind of person. But I will not pretend that I do not want justice. Call it karma. Call it the universe finding its balance. I have begun to believe that actions have echoes. Those echoes do not always hit where we want them to, and they do not always look like the punishment stories promise. Still, I could not let the thought go that life has a way of teaching us, sometimes gently, sometimes harshly. I do not know yet how that will happen for my son and his wife. I do not plan it, and I do not wish it with hot hatred. I only hold a quiet belief that their choices will follow them, as surely as a shadow follows a body. This is where my story begins. Not with blame, not with a shouted accusation, but with a single sentence that made everything tilt. Give him a good bath and bury him. We have to leave for Tuscany. From that line comes the rest of what I will tell you. The small betrayals that grew, the legal papers and cold conversations, the secrets that came to light and the soft reckoning that followed. If you stay with me, I will tell you about family dinners that felt like trials, letters that opened like wounds, and a turning point so strange that even now it feels like a story told by someone else. For now, sit with me a moment longer. When Michael and I first moved to Evanston, we didn't have much, but we had time. And time was everything. The town was small enough that people remembered faces, and the lake was only a short walk from our little brick house. Michael used to say that the sound of the waves could wash away the noise of the world. In those early years, life was simple, not perfect, not glamorous, but ours. Michael was a quiet man, steady and patient. He fixed things around the house, never in a rush, always humming while he worked. He had a way of making even ordinary chores feel calm. Every morning he brewed coffee while I opened the curtains, and we'd talk about what the day might bring. Those moments felt small then, but now they are what I hold on to. The smell of toast, the creak of the kitchen floor, the way the sunlight caught the side of his face when he smiled. Our son, Daniel, was born during a cold March storm. He was a tiny thing with a loud cry that filled the hospital room. Michael held him first, tears in his eyes, and whispered something only the baby could hear. From that day on, he was devoted to being the kind of father he had always wished for. Present, gentle, never too proud to listen. I remember summer days when they'd sit together on the front steps, eating popsicles, their feet bare and dusty from the yard. As Daniel grew older, he began to chase things beyond what we could give him. There was nothing wrong with that. Every parent wants their child to dream bigger. But sometimes I think success has a way of changing, not just where a person goes, but who they think they have to be. When he went to college, he called often. After he graduated, the calls became shorter. When he got married, they became fewer still. I met his wife, Lauren, for the first time at a dinner he organized at a restaurant by the water. She was beautiful, in the way people on television are beautiful. Polished, careful, confident. She smiled easily but looked at everything like she was already planning the next move. I wanted to like her, and I think I did at first. But even that night, I noticed the way Daniel looked to her before answering a question, the way her hand rested on his wrist as if she owned the conversation. After they married, they moved to a modern house across town, closer to the city. I would visit sometimes, bringing food, though Lauren would always insist they didn't need anything homemade. She preferred takeout, she said, because it saved time. The first time I brought over Michael's favorite stew, she smiled politely, took the pot and said, "We'll freeze it. Thank you." When I saw it still sitting in their freezer 2 months later, untouched, I told myself not to be hurt. Michael, though, noticed everything. "They're busy," he would say gently. "They're young. Let them live their way." He always tried to smooth things over. He loved peace more than pride. When Daniel forgot birthdays or called only after long gaps, Michael would shrug. "He's building his life," he'd remind me. "We raised him to stand on his own, didn't we?" Still, there were moments that made my heart ache. The holidays when plans kept changing. The dinners that turned into polite visits rather than family gatherings. Lauren was always friendly, but never warm. She spoke more about promotions and travel plans than family. I would listen quietly, nodding, trying not to feel small in the world she had built around them. One winter, Michael fell ill with a persistent cough. It started lightly, just enough to make me worry. He promised it was nothing, but his strength began to fade. Doctor visits turned into hospital stays, and our days began to revolve around test results and quiet waiting rooms. Daniel visited once every few weeks, always in a hurry, always checking his watch. Lauren rarely came. She said hospitals made her uncomfortable. Sometimes, while sitting beside Michael's hospital bed, I'd watch the sunlight fade on the wall and think about the years behind us. How we built everything out of love, not luxury. How we had raised a son who once couldn't sleep without his father's stories, but now didn't have time to hear mine. I didn't resent him, not then. But a heaviness began to settle in me. A kind of quiet disappointment that I couldn't name. One afternoon, Michael looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Promise me something." His voice was weak but steady. "Don't let bitterness take root. Whatever happens, keep your peace. The world sorts itself out." I nodded, but I didn't fully understand what he meant until much later. When he passed, Daniel's first words were practical ones, about arrangements, about costs, about scheduling. Lauren stood nearby, scrolling on her phone, already discussing flights and bookings for their planned summer trip. I remember standing there listening to them, feeling like a ghost at my own husband's farewell. They insisted on handling everything quickly, efficiently. Lauren said, "Dad wouldn't want a big scene. Let's just keep it simple." I wanted to believe she meant well, but when I saw how eager they were to return to their normal lives, something in me began to shift. I smiled and stayed calm, just as Michael would have wanted, but inside, something had begun to turn over. Not anger, just a slow awakening after the funeral. They stayed only long enough to pack a few of Michael's things into boxes. They told me not to worry about anything, that they would take care of the paperwork. Then they left for Tuscany. I watched their car drive away from the window, the taillights fading down the quiet Evanston street. The house was silent again. In the days that followed, I found myself cleaning rooms that no longer needed to be cleaned, cooking meals for one, listening to the hum of the refrigerator as if it were a companion. I thought about the life I had given to family, the years spent holding everything together, quietly, faithfully. And I wondered what happens to all that love when it is no longer returned. Neighbors came by, bringing casseroles and kind words. They spoke softly, as if grief were contagious. I smiled and thanked them. But when they left, I sat alone, feeling something else. Not just loss, but the realization that I had spent my whole life caring for people who had already moved past me. One evening, as the sun set over the lake, I walked along the familiar path Michael and I used to take. The air was cool, and the water shimmered gold. I stopped and whispered into the wind, "If the world sorts itself out, then let it do so." I didn't mean it as a wish for revenge. I meant it as surrender, a letting go of control, a quiet trust that life has its way of teaching lessons. I didn't know it then. But that whisper was the beginning of something. The same calm patience that Michael lived by had taken root in me. And though I couldn't see it yet, the world was already beginning to turn. Choices were being made beyond my sight. And the same people who had hurried past grief were soon to learn that time, no matter how much you try to manage it, has its own sense of balance. The first few weeks after Michael's passing moved like a gray fog. I woke up, cooked breakfast, watered the plants, and watched the lake from my window. It was strange how quickly the world returned to its rhythm while mine felt permanently changed. Daniel called me once from Tuscany. His voice was cheerful, light, too light for someone who had just lost his father. He said the trip was a good distraction. Lauren's laughter echoed faintly in the background. That kind of bright, social laughter people use when they want the world to know they're fine. I told him I hoped he was taking care of himself, and that his father would have been glad he kept living. He paused for a moment and said, "Yeah, Dad wouldn't want us sitting around being sad." Then he added, "The weather here is beautiful, Mom. You'd love it." Something in me broke a little then, but not in a dramatic way. It was a soft break, the kind you only feel later when the silence stretches out too long. I hung up and sat on the couch for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Grief has a strange way of rearranging things inside you. The pain starts sharp, but then it settles into something quieter, like an ache that becomes part of your breathing. By the time they returned, summer had turned to early fall. Evanston's trees were beginning to yellow, and the air smelled faintly of rain. Daniel and Lauren came over one Sunday afternoon, bringing a bottle of wine and travel stories. Lauren showed me pictures on her phone. Vineyards, cafes, smiling faces, sunsets. In one photo, Daniel stood by the sea holding a glass of champagne. There was laughter in his eyes, but when he looked at the photo himself, he grew quiet. I noticed it, that flicker of unease. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was just the weight of what he didn't say. I poured tea and listened as they spoke about the trip, pretending not to see the way Daniel's eyes avoided mine. When they left that evening, he hugged me briefly. "You're doing okay, Mom?" he asked. "I'm learning to be," I said softly. He nodded, but there was something tired in his face. That night, I felt an odd calm settle over me. I didn't know it then. But that visit was the first tremor, the quiet sign that the world had begun to turn. A few months later, I heard from a neighbor that Daniel's firm had been struggling. He worked for an investment group in Chicago, and apparently a few bad deals had caught up with them. I didn't ask him about it. I knew he wouldn't tell me the truth. Not yet. But small hints began to appear. He started calling a little more often, asking casual questions like, "Are you managing the bills okay? Or did Dad leave any extra savings?" The tone was gentle, but there was something underneath. A quiet tension. Lauren, on the other hand, grew more distant. Her voice on the phone became clipped, polite and cold. She had always been proud of her image, and the idea of financial trouble must have unsettled her deeply. I could sense the strain between them even from miles away. One evening, Daniel came over alone. He looked thinner, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. I made him tea, and he sat at the table staring into the cup like it held all his answers. "Things are rough," he said finally. "The market's bad. We might need to sell the house." I nodded, keeping my face calm. "That happens? Houses come and go. What matters is how you live in them." He looked at me sharply, maybe expecting me to panic or scold him. But I didn't. Michael's words lived in me now. "The world sorts itself out." Daniel sighed. "Lauren isn't taking it well. She's angry all the time." I wanted to say, "Now you know what it feels like to stand next to someone who has no room for grief." But I didn't. Instead, I reached out and placed my hand over his. "She'll come around," I said. "People show their fear in strange ways." He nodded but didn't look convinced. When he left that evening, I watched him from the window. His shoulders were slumped, his steps heavy. I had never seen him look so lost. Over the next few weeks, I noticed how quickly things shifted. Their social media posts stopped. The cheerful photos vanished. Mutual friends stopped mentioning them. It was as if the golden life they had built was quietly cracking from the inside. Then winter came, long and cold. I kept to myself reading, knitting, writing small notes to Michael in a notebook I kept by the window. I didn't wish harm on anyone, but there were nights when I whispered to the empty room, "Let them see, let them understand." In January, Daniel called again. his voice shaking. Mom, Lauren's been staying with her sister for a few days. She says she needs space. I kept silent for a moment. Space from what? From everything, he said. From me. From the stress, from the guilt. That word, guilt, sat between us. He said it as if it had been waiting all along to be spoken. He came to visit again, a week later. This time he stayed for dinner. He looked older somehow, worn. He told me they'd had to sell one of their cars, that Lauren's company was downsizing too. As he talked, I listened carefully, not out of satisfaction, but with the strange stillness of someone who has seen enough of life to understand that it always circles back. I felt no triumph, only a quiet sadness. And maybe, somewhere deep inside, the faintest sense of justice. By spring, Lauren stopped visiting completely. Daniel said she was figuring things out. He tried to sound hopeful, but there was a hollowness in his tone. I began seeing her name in local news. Small stories about her company's legal troubles, unpaid taxes, business partners arguing in court. It was nothing dramatic, but it painted a picture. The same woman who had once planned luxury trips and looked down on home-cooked meals was now scrambling to save her image. And through it all, I stayed where I was, in my small house by the lake, tending to my plants, baking bread for the neighbors, walking along the same paths Michael and I once shared. Sometimes I would catch my reflection in the window and see peace where I expected pain. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was steadiness. I had lost much, but I had not lost myself. That summer, Daniel invited me to lunch at a small cafe near downtown. When I arrived, I barely recognized him. His suit looked worn, his face tired. He smiled faintly. "Mom, it's been a rough year." I nodded. "I can see that." He hesitated, then said, "I think you were right. About Dad, about slowing down." I didn't understand what mattered. I wanted to reach across the table and hold him, but I didn't. I let him speak. I kept chasing things. Money, reputation, approval. Lauren wanted more of everything, and I kept trying to give it. But every time I thought we had it, something slipped away. It's like sand. The tighter you hold, the more you lose. I watched him, this grown man who had once been my little boy, and felt both sorrow and grace. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "life makes us stop so we can see what's already broken." He nodded, his eyes moist. "I didn't treat you well, did I?" I smiled softly. "You treated me the way the world taught you to, but now the world is teaching you something new." He laughed, though it was a broken laugh. "Karma, huh?" I looked out the window at the slow-moving cars and said, "Maybe. Or maybe just life being honest." From that day on, he began visiting more often. He'd bring groceries, fix small things around the house, sit by the window quietly. Sometimes we'd talk about Michael, and sometimes we'd sit in silence. Lauren, though, remained a ghost in his stories. Their marriage eventually ended, quietly, without bitterness, just resignation. Daniel didn't say much about it, but one evening, he told me she had moved away. Her business had collapsed, her reputation stained by decisions she once thought were clever. "She blames me," he said softly. "People always look for someone to blame," I replied. "But sometimes it's no one's fault, just the echo of choices." He frowned. "Echo?" "Yes," I said. "Everything we do sends out an echo. It comes back in its own time." He stared at his hands for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I think I hear it now." That night after he left, I sat on the porch and watched the stars. I thought about Michael, how he had always believed in balance, the same patience he had lived with now, lived through me. The house felt full again, not because anyone else was there, but because peace had returned to it. I began volunteering at a small community center, helping seniors with daily tasks. I found comfort in small acts of kindness. A shared cup of coffee, a conversation about old memories, a gentle laugh between strangers. Life didn't give me back what I lost, but it gave me something else. Perspective. I could finally see the long thread connecting everything. Love, neglect, loss, understanding. One afternoon, I saw Daniel walking toward me from across the street, holding a small bouquet of lilies, Michael's favorite. He placed them on the kitchen table and said, "I thought Dad might like these." I smiled. He would. We stood there in silence, the sunlight slanting through the window. The world had shifted, and though the pain of the past remained, it no longer ruled us. Daniel had learned what it meant to lose, what it meant to hurt, and what it meant to rebuild. And I had learned that letting go isn't weakness. It's strength in its truest form. Some people wait for karma like a storm, but I've learned it moves like the tide. Slow, certain, and always returning what the shore has given away. And sometimes, when I walk by the lake in Evanston, and the wind brushes my hair, I think I hear Michael's voice again. See? The world sorts itself out. He was right. It always does. The phone rang just after dawn. That strange hour when the sky still looks undecided. Half blue, half gray, and the world hasn't quite opened its eyes. I almost didn't pick up. Calls at that hour usually mean one thing. News that changes the shape of your day. Or your life. It was Lauren's voice. Flat, frightened, holding itself together. "Mom, it's Daniel. He collapsed this morning. They think it's his heart." For a second, I couldn't breathe. The room went silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I didn't ask questions. I just grabbed my coat and purse and walked out. The street was still wet from last night's rain. The air smelled like cold iron. At the hospital, the doors opened with that soft hiss. That sound I remembered from the day Michael was taken away. It had been years, but grief has a way of hiding in the corners, waiting for footsteps like mine. I found Lauren sitting on one of those orange vinyl chairs outside the ICU. Her perfect hair was unbrushed, mascara streaked under her eyes. When she saw me, she stood quickly, like a child caught doing something wrong. "They said it was stress," she whispered. "Too much work, not enough rest. He's stable now, but they're keeping him under observation." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I said softly, "Take me to him." The room was bright and quiet, machines humming in slow rhythm. Daniel lay there with a pale face, tubes running from his arm. His chest rose and fell, steady but weak. I stood at the foot of the bed, not sure if I should speak. He looked so different. The sharp edges of ambition had melted away, leaving only the boy who used to fall asleep on my lap after school. I wanted to touch his hair, but my hands wouldn't move. I remembered the day he told the ambulance to give his father a good bath and go. How those words cut deeper than any blade. And now here he was, helpless, dependent on strangers in white coats. Karma doesn't shout. It whispers, softly, patiently, until the echo reaches home. Lauren stood beside me, wringing her hands. "He's been under so much pressure," she murmured. He wouldn't listen to me. I told him to slow down. Her voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. Not pride. It wasn't the fear of losing money or control. It was the raw, human fear of losing someone you still needed. I sat down on the chair next to the bed. The metal felt cold through my skirt. For a while I just watched his breathing, letting the sound of the monitors fill the silence. There was something strangely peaceful about it. That steady beeping, like a heartbeat counting its way back to grace. I thought of Michael, of the morning he died, how he had held my hand and said, "Take care of our boy, even when he forgets who you are." And I had promised. Back then I didn't understand what he meant. Now I did. Lauren left to make a call. The nurse came in, checked the monitors, smiled gently at me. "You can talk to him," she said. "He might hear you." So I did. "Daniel," I whispered, leaning closer. "You always worked too hard. Even as a child, you'd stack your toy blocks until they fell. I told you they'd topple one day, But you never listened." A small smile came to my lips. "You got that stubbornness from your father." The sound of my own voice surprised me. It wasn't angry anymore. It was tired, tender, like an old song sung softly in the dark. Hours passed. Light moved slowly across the wall, shifting from gray to gold, and back to gray again. Lauren returned, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She offered me one. I took it. For the first time in years, we sat side by side without pretense. She said quietly, "I didn't know how to call you. I didn't think you'd come." I looked at her. When a mother's child is hurt, she comes. "That's all." She lowered her eyes. "He's been difficult. Everything had to be perfect. He'd wake up at 5, answer calls till midnight. I told him this pace would kill him." I nodded. We didn't need to say more. Life had already said enough. When the doctor came in, his voice was calm but firm. "Your son's stable for now," he said. "But this is a serious warning. He'll need rest and support." Support. Such a simple word, and yet it felt heavier than all the money Daniel ever made. That night, I stayed in the waiting room. Hospitals never sleep. They just breathe slower at night. I watched the janitor mop the floor, a nurse adjust a blanket, a child whisper prayers beside a vending machine. Everywhere I looked, there was love. Quiet, desperate, unconditional love. And I realized, maybe this was how the universe teaches us, not through thunder, but through silence. Around midnight, Lauren came and sat beside me again. Her voice was soft. "They said he might wake up by morning." I nodded. "He will." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you hate us?" I looked at her. Really looked. Not as the woman who had pushed me away, but as a person breaking under her own choices. "No," I said. "Hate is heavy. I've carried enough already." She began to cry then quietly, her hands trembling around a paper napkin. I didn't touch her. Sometimes forgiveness starts by simply not turning away. When the nurse finally came to tell us Daniel was waking, I followed her down the corridor. The sound of our footsteps echoed softly. As I entered the room, Daniel's eyes fluttered open. He looked confused at first, then saw me. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice cracked and dry. I went to him slowly, afraid that moving too fast might break the moment. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "I'm here." His eyes filled with tears. "I thought I wouldn't see you again." I smiled through mine. "Then it's good you were wrong." He tried to speak more, but I stopped him. "Don't talk now. Just rest." I placed my hand on his, and for the first time since Michael's funeral, I felt warmth travel back through me. Fragile, human, forgiving. The room felt smaller once he opened his eyes, as if every unspoken thing between us had suddenly taken up space. He kept staring at me like he was trying to remember who I was. Then the memory came, and so did the tears he'd never allowed himself before. "Don't cry," I said softly. "You're still here. That's all that matters right now." He nodded, and the machines kept their slow, steady rhythm, like a lullaby for both of us. Lauren came in quietly. She looked different, smaller somehow, her confidence folded into guilt. When Daniel reached for her hand, she took it without a word, and for the first time I saw them as two people simply scared of losing each other. The doctor said he would recover, but it would take time. "He needs rest, less pressure, more family," he said. Then he smiled at me as if to underline that last word. After the doctor left, silence filled the room again. I watched Daniel drift between waking and sleep. His breathing was calm, but his mind was clearly elsewhere, somewhere heavy. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I thought I was strong, Mom. I thought if I just worked harder, everything would stay together." I waited. I missed Dad's funeral in my heart, even though I was there. I thought keeping busy would protect me from this. He gestured weakly at the hospital around him. "You were scared to feel it," I said. "That's all." He blinked. And you? Did you ever forgive me for that day? I looked at him for a long time before answering. I never stopped loving you, Daniel. Forgiveness is just love after it's been bruised a little. He smiled faintly. I didn't deserve that. Maybe not then, I said. But you're trying now. Later that evening, Lauren brought soup from home. The smell of rosemary and garlic filled the room. It reminded me of Sunday dinners long ago before success built its walls around them. She handed me a bowl and whispered, "Thank you for coming." I nodded. You did the right thing calling me. Her eyes glistened. I was afraid you wouldn't answer. I almost didn't, I admitted, and she gave a small, trembling laugh, the kind that escapes when the truth finally touches air. When visiting hours ended, I offered to stay the night. Lauren agreed quickly, almost with relief, and left to rest. As the hallway lights dimmed, I pulled the chair close to Daniel's bed. He was half asleep, breathing softly. I reached for his hand again, and he gripped mine, stronger this time. "Promise me," he murmured. "If I get another chance, I'll do better." I brushed his hair back like I used to. That's all any of us can promise. Outside, snow had started falling. It gathered on the window ledge in quiet layers, turning the city into something gentler. Hospitals have their own seasons. The beeping and footsteps, the sighs of relief, the whispered prayers. I sat there until dawn, watching the sky lighten and realizing how strange it felt to have hope again. In the morning, Daniel looked better. The color had returned to his face. He smiled when the nurse checked his pulse. "Guess I'm not done yet," he said. I smiled back. "No, not yet." Lauren arrived with fresh clothes and a thermos of coffee. She thanked the nurses, asked about his diet, and for the first time in years, she seemed less polished, more human. When she handed me a cup, she said quietly, "We've been talking. Maybe we'll slow down for a while. Spend time somewhere quiet. I think we forgot what home feels like." "Evanston's still here," I said. She nodded. "Maybe we'll come by once he's strong enough." I didn't answer. Some things can't be planned. They have to earn their way back. Before I left that day, Daniel looked at me with the same eyes he had when he was little, the ones that always searched for reassurance. "I'm sorry," he said simply. I touched his cheek. "Then start fresh. That's the only apology that matters." As I walked down the corridor, I heard the faint sound of his laughter. Weak, but real. It followed me out into the cold air, where the snow had turned to slush, and the morning smelled of coffee and wet pavement. The world kept moving, as it always does. But something inside me had shifted. The ache was still there, but it didn't control me anymore. Maybe forgiveness isn't a single moment. Maybe it's a slow unfreezing, one heartbeat at a time. I looked back once before getting into the cab. Through the glass doors, I could see Lauren helping him sit up, fixing his blanket, fussing like she'd never done before. They looked small, human, and finally, reachable. The driver asked where to. "Home," I said. And for the first time in a long while, that word didn't feel empty. When Daniel came home from the hospital, everything about the house felt different. It wasn't just the soft footsteps or the lowered voices. It was the air itself. The tension that once lived in the corners seemed to have lifted, leaving behind something fragile, but clean, like the scent after rain. Lauren had changed too. The woman who once carried herself like she was late for something important now moved slower, almost careful not to disturb the quiet. She greeted me with a small, sincere smile when I arrived to help with Daniel's meals. Doctor said light food only. She reminded me as she unpacked groceries. "No red meat, no stress?" I chuckled softly. "I can manage one of those." For the first time, she laughed. Really laughed. And I saw a piece of the girl Daniel had fallen in love with long ago. Those first few weeks were filled with small recoveries. Daniel would sit near the window, wrapped in a blanket sipping tea while watching the light move across the floor. He was thinner, paler but gentler too. Sometimes he'd ask about his father, about the funeral, the flowers, the prayers, and every time I told him what I remembered, not to reopen wounds but to help him see the man he'd lost. One afternoon as I was washing the dishes, he said quietly, "I should have been there, really been there, not just standing beside the ambulance pretending everything was fine." I turned off the tap. "You can't change that day," I said. "But you can live differently now." He nodded, his eyes full of something new. Humility, maybe. Or gratitude. It wasn't long before I noticed karma doing its quiet work. The company that had consumed Daniel's time and health began to struggle. The investors he once trusted pulled away when he took medical leave. His absence revealed cracks in the foundation. Choices made in greed. Shortcuts he'd never known about. Lauren told me about it one morning, sitting at the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around her mug. "They've been calling him non-stop," she said. "But he won't go back. Not yet." "Good," I said. "Let them manage their own storms." She smiled faintly. "He told me yesterday he wants to sell our shares. He said money that costs your peace is too expensive." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by my window, watching the streetlights blink through the trees. And for the first time I whispered a quiet thank you to the universe. Not for punishment, but for balance. Because karma doesn't roar, it whispers. It adjusts. And it was doing its work now, softly but surely. Weeks turned into months. Daniel started walking again, first around the living room, then down the street with me by his side. Neighbors stopped to greet us. Some looked surprised. Perhaps remembering the day the ambulance had carried his father away, while they drove off for their summer trip. But nobody mentioned it. Maybe they didn't have to. Life has its own way of showing people their mirrors. Lauren began volunteering at the local community center, teaching art classes to children. When I saw her there one afternoon, surrounded by little hands holding brushes, I almost didn't recognize her. She caught my eye and smiled shyly. "I needed to do something that isn't about me," she said later, packing up supplies. "Turns out helping others helps you too." I just nodded. Some lessons are too sacred to interrupt with words. Daniel's recovery wasn't perfect. He had days of fatigue, moments of fear when his heart fluttered or the pain returned. But those were the days that shaped him most. He started keeping a journal, something he'd never done before. In it, he wrote letters. To his father, to himself, to me. He never showed them. But sometimes I'd see him slip one into the drawer by his bedside, with a quiet, reflective smile. One morning in early spring, I found him sitting in the backyard, reading under the weak sunlight. The trees were just beginning to bud again, fragile green against the gray branches. He looked peaceful, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be. The one who chased fireflies behind our old house, his laughter echoing in the dusk. "Mom," he said, setting his book aside. "You think people ever really change?" I took a deep breath. Not all at once, but little by little, yes. Like winter turning into spring. You don't see it happen. You just wake up one day and realize the snow's gone. He nodded. "Then maybe I'm getting there." We spent that afternoon planting flowers. Marigolds, petunias, lavender. He dug the soil carefully, pausing now and then to rest. And I couldn't help thinking how strange it felt to be here, in this small circle of forgiveness, after everything. When we were done, he looked at the row of blossoms and smiled. "Dad would have liked this." "Yes," I said. "He would have loved it." As weeks passed, the garden grew, and so did the quiet between us. Not the cold kind, but the peaceful kind. Lauren would join us sometimes, bringing lemonade and stories from the art center. She'd sit near Daniel, listening more than she spoke. And occasionally they'd share a look, soft, familiar, humbled. It was as if they had both stepped out of a long shared dream and were learning how to live awake. One evening I came to visit and found a small box on my porch. Inside was a framed photo, Daniel, Lauren, and me, sitting together in the garden. Beneath it, a note in Daniel's handwriting. For the woman who taught me that love doesn't end when mistakes begin. Thank you for waiting for me to find my way back. I cried then, quietly, freely. Not from sadness, but from the fullness that only forgiveness can bring. I placed the frame by my window, where the evening sun caught it every day. Life didn't turn perfect after that. Daniel's health stayed delicate. Lauren still had moments of distance, and I too had days when old memories pressed on my chest. But something had shifted permanently. The weight that once lived between us had turned into light. Sometimes I'd see them walking by the lake in Evanston, holding hands, talking softly. No rush in their steps. I never called out. It was enough just to see them living better, loving slower. And maybe that's what karma really is. Not punishment, not revenge, but a quiet correction of paths. It gives back what we send out, but with time to understand it. Now, when I visit the cemetery, I bring fresh flowers and sit beside my husband's grave. I tell him about Daniel's recovery, about Lauren's art classes, about the peace finally returning to our small world. I tell him how much I still miss him, but also how grateful I am that our story, painful as it was, didn't end in bitterness, because life, I've learned, doesn't close its doors with anger. It leaves them slightly open, just enough for light to come through. And sometimes when the wind passes softly through the trees, I swear I can hear his voice saying, "You did good, love. You held on just long enough." I smile then, letting the sun warm my face. For the first time in years, I feel whole again. Not because everything was fixed, but because I finally stopped needing it to be. It's been almost a year now since that day in the hospital. Sometimes it still feels like yesterday. That sound of machines beeping, the faint smell of antiseptic, the weight of fear sitting in my chest. But then I look around and realize how far we've all come. Daniel's doing better. He walks slower than before, and he's learned to rest. Something I once thought he'd never do. Lauren still runs her art classes, and every time I visit I see a different kind of joy on her face. Quieter. More real. The children adore her. They paint things that don't always make sense. Blue trees, orange skies, and she praises every one of them. Maybe she's learning that life doesn't have to make perfect sense either. As for me, I've learned to live gently. I wake early, make my tea, and sit by the window that faces the garden Daniel planted. The marigolds are bright again this year. They always remind me of how grief and growth can live side by side. I still talk to my husband sometimes, not in the way that expects an answer, but in the way that keeps love alive. I tell him about Daniel's progress, about how karma came quietly, not with punishment, but with lessons, and how, in the end, we all found our way back to each other. There are days I still ache for what was lost. The years of distance, the words left unsaid, the goodbyes that came too early. But I also know that holding on to pain doesn't protect us from it. Letting go is what heals. Daniel once asked me if I ever hated him for that day. The day they left for Tuscany. The day his father's body went into the ground without him standing close enough to see. I told him the truth. No, I didn't hate you. I just wanted you to remember where love began, and to come home to it. He had tears in his eyes then. And did I? I smiled. Yes, you did. He reached for my hand and I realized something simple. Love doesn't expire when people fail us. It bends, it bruises, but it stays. Because real love isn't a feeling. It's a choice we keep making, even when it hurts. Sometimes when I sit by the lake in Evanston, I watch the families walking by. Mothers with strollers, couples holding hands, old friends sharing coffee. Everyone carrying something invisible. Regret, forgiveness, love, loss. And I wonder how many stories are unfolding quietly around us, each one trying to find its way to peace. Maybe that's why I tell mine. Not to reopen wounds, but to show that healing is possible. That even after betrayal, after cold silences and selfish choices, we can still find our way home. Because the truth is, life has its own way of balancing what's broken. It doesn't rush. It waits, patiently, until we're ready to understand. Karma, I have learned, isn't cruel. It doesn't destroy. It teaches. It gives us mirrors when we least want them, and lessons when we least expect them. And when we finally stop fighting, it shows us the version of ourselves we were always meant to be. For me, that version is softer now, more forgiving, more grateful for the ordinary days. The smell of soup on the stove, the sound of laughter from the street, the quiet comfort of being remembered. I don't need grand gestures anymore, just small, honest moments. Daniel calling to check if I've taken my medicine, Lauren sending a photo of the kids at her art class, a text that says, "Thinking of you, Mom." These are the things that build peace. If you're listening to this and carrying your own story, maybe a wound that still stings, or a silence that hasn't broken yet, I want you to know this. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's freedom. It doesn't mean what happened was right. It means you're strong enough not to let it define you. One day, the people who hurt you may realize what they lost. Or maybe they won't. But either way, you'll have peace. Not because of them, but because of you. Because you chose to be kind even when the world wasn't. So tonight, before you sleep, I hope you remember that your story isn't over. It's still unfolding, still finding its balance, still learning how to turn pain into something gentle. I look at the photo frame on my windowsill, the one Daniel gave me, the three of us smiling in the garden. Behind us, the sunlight falls just right, soft and golden. Every time I see it, I whisper, "We made it." Not perfectly, but honestly. And maybe that's all we were ever meant to do. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you love or someone you've lost, please share it with them. Maybe it'll help them find their way too. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories about real people, real families, and the quiet strength that keeps us going, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment below. I'd love to know what part of this story spoke to you the most, because every story heals a little faster when it's shared. And maybe that's what love really is. Not the perfect ending, but the courage to begin again.